No-waste flying geese start with one large square and 4 smaller squares. The smaller squares will form the outer wings of your flying geese, like this. The first thing that we need to do is draw a line on every one of our small squares. Now you can use a special tool to do this, like a Hera marker or invisible ink, but you don't have to. You can use a regular butter knife. So that's what we'll do here. I'm gonna take my ruler and line it up point to point diagonally across the square, then holding my butter knife just like I would a rotary cutter with the flat edge down and the more serrated edge pointing up. I'm going to just press down against the fabric right along the line of that ruler. I usually go over it twice. And when I remove this, we'll see we have a nice clear crease that will show us exactly where to sew. At the sewing machine, we're gonna line up one of our small squares in the corner of a big square, lining those edges nice and neatly, and then start sewing 1/4 of an inch away from the line that you marked. Not on the line, to the side of the line. Now you can eyeball this like I do, or if you don't feel comfortable with that, feel free to draw additional lines on both sides. We're gonna sew on both sides of this square to help you get that nice straight line. All right, we're gonna sew across. Stop about 1 inch from the edge and take another small square, line that up nice and neatly so that it overlaps with the first square right here in the middle. That's a little counterintuitive, but it's gonna work out. All right, so now that we've got that laying nice and flat, just keep sewing right onto the second square and all the way to the corner. All right, I'm gonna cut my thread, turn around, and sew the opposite direction. Okay, we've sewn along both sides of our marked line right down the middle of this square. You can see we've got our overlapping small squares here in the middle. Those are about to become the wings of our flying geese. So the first thing we're gonna do is cut this right in half, and we're gonna cut on the line that we marked. So we're gonna go right in between those 2 lines of stitching, like that. Now we've got 2 units. Each one of these is going to become 2 flying geese. So I'm gonna go to the ironing board, press these open. This is where it gets a little funky, and then we'll go back to the sewing machine. Once those wings are pressed open, it's time to do the other side. So take one of those remaining small squares that we've already marked through the middle, line that up right in the corner so that this corner actually overlaps with the first 2 wings that we made. And this corner should be pointing straight through. What we're gonna do now is again sew on both sides of that marked line. We'll cut this apart and then we'll have our flying geese. Let's go to the sewing machine. We're ready to sew again, and I like to sew from an outer corner towards that middle point. Cut your thread, turn, and sew the other direction. We're ready to cut again, and we're just gonna go right through those 2 lines of stitching and separate these last 2 units. Okay, so just like before, we're gonna cut right over the line that we had marked with that butter knife. Slice these apart, and each one is now a flying geese block. I'm gonna press this open and then come right back to show you the easiest way to trim these. All right, we've pressed, we're ready to trim. Now the primary purpose in trimming up a block like this is to make sure that it's the right dimensions so that it fits alongside your other pieces and so that our seam allowances are going to be at just the right place. So when we sew this together, we're going to want this point to be right on the edge of our seam allowance so it doesn't get cut off and so that we don't have a lot of white space there. The way to do that is to cut 1/4 of an inch away from that point. And you can see already that this edge is not straight. So we're going to clean that up as well. All right, so we lay a ruler over it. I like to use a square ruler for these. It's just a little less awkward than a long rectangular ruler. The only thing that really matters though is that you have this 45-degree line. We're going to use that in a second and you'll see why that matters. Lay your ruler over your flying geese and line it up so that we have this dot, which is 1/4 of an inch or whatever marking you have on your ruler, right at the point of that flying geese block, okay? Now I'm going to cut away from it. And what we have left is exactly 1/4 of an inch. So when I sew that to the next block in my quilt row, I'm going to have a really tidy point. All right, so let's turn this so it's facing us. Get our ruler again. Now we're going to use that 45-degree line, okay? So these blocks for the pattern I'm working on should be 3.5 by 6.5. So I'll line this up so that the 6.5 line is over here on the left edge of my block. And then I'll scooch it so that this 45-degree line, whoops, is along the edge of my flying geese. That tells me that when this is all done, that triangle shape is going to be perfectly centered in the middle. And it'll be nice and tidy when we sew it together. It could be that I have a 6.5-inch block, but it's perhaps over here and that point isn't in the corner. When we sew these together, it's not going to look very even. Doesn't have to be perfect, but using that 45-degree line will really help you, okay? Lined up like that. I'm gonna cut along this side, move that away. I'm gonna rotate it, clip off that little dog ear, and then we'll go this way as well, just so we can clean up that kind of curved edge and make that a little neater. All right, we're done.